We're 48 days away from President-elect Trump taking office, and with that will come sweeping immigration and border policy changes. Trump has already given glimpses into how he plans to tackle his agenda on day one, threatening tariffs against Mexico and Canada. President Biden's policies were a major campaign point for Republicans, who successfully campaigned on what they call a border crisis fueled by a record number of migrants reaching the border. Joining me now is the Hill staff writer, Rafael Bernal, to discuss this more. Raf, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Michael. Great to see you.
So, for starters, Republicans are raising concerns about this 500,000 unaccompanied children that have crossed the border during the Biden administration. How have White House policies actually impacted those numbers?
Well, the first thing that we have to remember is this is not a new number. CBP, Customs and Border Protection, has been putting out this number for quite some time now. So we knew this was the case. And it's not disproportionate, the 500,000 encounters with unaccompanied minors to the about 8.5 million encounters globally with migrants during the Biden administration. Now, it goes to the bigger question. Did the Biden administration somehow attract these 8.5 million people? Obviously, there were crises in Latin America that created this wave of migration. This was not just the Biden administration, inviting people in. It certainly did the opposite. But there is that political debate, and it's a good cudgel for Republicans who are gonna simply keep using it.
And since Donald Trump was elected, have we seen a significant change in Mexico's policies toward migrants ahead of his inauguration?
We've seen a significant change in rhetoric. Trump wants to take credit for reduced migration in the Americas, which over the last year has been reduced. The most likely thing is Mexico will gladly let him take credit, although what's really happened on the enforcement side of things has been a deal between the Biden administration and two successive Mexican administrations that have really just basically internally deported third country nationals within Mexico back to the south of Mexico so they can try again, often unsuccessfully again.
And President-elect Trump, he recently held a phone call with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum after threatening those tariffs, and quickly after Trump took a victory lap, saying Sheinbaum had agreed to stop migration through Mexico. But the president of Mexico also suggested that that's not the case. Where does their relationship stand, and what do you expect to see play out between these two over the next 4 years?
Well, again, Sheinbaum is going to let Trump take credit for whatever he wants to take credit. Sheinbaum's priority is to protect Mexican economy, and the Mexican economy depends on exports and imports of U.S. goods and services, including energy. So she's going to try to protect that. She's going to let Trump, again, take these victory laps as much as he needs to, if in order to keep the USMCA or something like it in place so that all of Mexico's industrial infrastructure, has somewhere to sell its goods.
And Trump has also threatened Canada with tariffs. What's the biggest impact his threats could have on the North American Free Trade Agreement, of course known as NAFTA?
Yeah, and its successor, USMCA, the biggest thing that can happen is the end of it. And Canada and Mexico are both terrified of that end because they've just engineered their economies over the past quarter century around this deal and around the version 1 and version 2 of this deal. So if this trade agreement goes away, they're left with economies that they'll have to start from pretty much the ground up and find new customers, and there's just not as big a market as the United States anywhere to be found, and certainly not in such close proximity. So both countries are panicking. They're starting to fight each other a little bit for see who's in Trump's better graces. The most realistic outcome is probably that there will be tough negotiations, and at some point the three countries will find a common ground, and and keep up this North American integration that's been going on for so long.
U.S. pipeline exports of natural gas go exclusively to Canada and Mexico. Does this give both countries leverage in this situation?
Especially Mexico, yes, because all of that Mexican industry is fueled by gas from Texas, and Texas does not want to lose its best customer for for gas, and Texas will exert some pressure on the Trump administration. Probably they would they'll want bigger, more immigration enforcement. They'll want to make Mexico, stick to the deal and make things really tough for Mexico, but not so tough that Mexico doesn't have a need to import all that Texan natural gas.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott recently highlighted progress on the state's border wall. Will we see a renewed push by Trump to complete projects like these?
I'm sure we will. And there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of symbolic projects. For Greg Abbott, his biggest symbolic project was busing migrants to different parts to blue cities. And you could argue politically that was very successful. It was an element in Trump's and broader Republican wins in 2024. So anything that's symbolic, anything that keeps a narrative where Trump and Abbott want it, you can expect to see more of that.
All right, Rafael Bernal, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Turning now to the Middle East, where Israel and Lebanon may have agreed to a ceasefire last week, but the fighting has yet to stop. On Monday, Israel unleashed its largest attack yet since the ceasefire as a warning over what it said were truce violations. Israel claims the strikes were in response to Hezbollah shooting a volley of projectiles over the border, while Hezbollah says Israel struck first and says complaints filed with mediators were futile. At least 11 people were killed in the strikes on Monday. The exchanges across Israel's northern border come as President-elect Trump is throwing his support behind Israel in their war with their neighbor to the south. Trump threatened Hamas in a Truth Social post and demanded they release the remaining hostages before he takes office next month. News Nation's Robert Sherman has the details.
One of the central campaign promises President-elect Donald Trump made was to bring down the temperature around the globe. The wars taking place overseas, both in Ukraine as well as in the Middle East, and now issuing a stern warning to the leadership in Hamas. He put this on Truth Social saying, quote, "Please let this truth serve to represent that if the hostages are not released prior to January 20th, 2025, the date that I proudly assume office as President of the United States, there will be all hell to pay in the Middle East for those in charge who perpetrated these atrocities against humanity." Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel in a special Israeli cabinet meeting responding to that by saying this. Take a listen.
I want to thank President Trump for his strong statement yesterday about the need for Hamas to release the hostages, the responsibility of Hamas, and this adds another force to our continuing effort to release all the hostages. Thank you, President Trump.
All of this comes as tensions still remain high in the Middle East, both at Israel's northern border with Lebanon, as well as in Gaza, as the war continues on. In total, it's estimated 7 Americans were taken hostage by Hamas. 4 of them now pronounced dead. Michael?
News Nation's Robert Sherman, thank you so much. And the Trump transition is underway. President-elect Trump is preparing to take control of the White House in just a little more than a month. And a new survey by Pew Research Center sheds light on what Americans think about his transition efforts. In today's Political Minute, Blake Berman, host of The Hill on News Nation, breaks down the approval ratings and how they stack up against other presidential transitions in recent history.
So is it a thumbs up for the presidential transition? I'm Blake Berman, host of The Hill on News Nation. As President-elect Donald Trump prepares for his next administration, a new poll from Pew Research Center shows how Americans view the process so far. Now, 47% have what they describe as cold feelings about Trump. 42% have warm feelings about him. 9% describe themselves as neutral. But when it comes to the presidential transition, A different story. Right now, 53% of Americans approve of the transition. Now, at this point before Trump's first term, that number was only at 41%. That's a little lower than the approval for President Biden's transition at this point in time in 2020. But if you look through recent history, you'll see the president-elect's current transition approval is tracking similarly to past transitions. I'm Blake Berman, and this is the News Nation Political Minute.
Lawmakers returned to Washington this week following the long Thanksgiving recess with a jam-packed to-do list. Congress is tasked with avoiding a government shutdown in addition to passing the annual defense bill. Washington correspondent Trevor Shirley has more.
We're at the beginning of what will be a very busy December.
From keeping the government open to funding the military and passing a major agricultural farm bill, Congress has a lot to do and less than 3 weeks to get it all done.
Let's be absolutely clear. December drama is not the way to demonstrate we're serious about our most basic governing responsibilities.
Priority 1 remains funding the government to avoid a shutdown set to happen December 20th.
Both sides are making progress negotiating on a bill that can pass the House and Senate with bipartisan support.
In all likelihood, Congress will pass a short-term continuing resolution, punting a long-term fix to the next Congress in January.
At this late hour, we'll have to act on legislation that comes to us over from the House.
Congress also has to pass the annual National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, to fund the military.
The NDAA has been passed without fail for decades with the cooperation from both sides, and I hope this year is no exception.
And on top of all that, more emergency relief money is still needed for parts of the country hit hard by natural disasters like hurricanes.
We should come together again at the end of the year to get disaster aid done, or we may not be ready to respond the next time Mother Nature wreaks havoc in our communities.
And that's it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Mychael Schnell. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.